Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I am your host, John Henson. It is Easter week here in the program, in the world, and this week is all about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. All right, I prefaced this last week. All right, this isn't going to be the traditional kind of episode where I tell you the life and times of Jesus. All right, this is just going to be about Jesus at a very specific time in his life. All right. And so here's the thing. All right. I want to preface this. I mean, it's probably been a little obvious before. I have a little bit of a complicated relationship with the Christian religion. I was born and raised in it. I attended a Christian school all through high school. Some crazy rules. All right. And got to college and I realized, maybe some of the things that were presented to me as fact growing up as a child and as a teenager, maybe they're not entirely true. Maybe there's some stuff about this that's wrong. And now here's the thing. I'm not one of those people who's like, no, there's no God. Jesus isn't real. Like there's no way to definitively prove that. All right. I would love, honestly, to have the existence of some supernatural being that watches over us and, protects us and cares for us. But, have you seen Africa lately and Gaza and Israel and the Middle East? There's blind spots or something. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. But I do have beef with a lot of the way that, at least in America, because that's my only experience with it, but how Christianity is presented, and especially now how churches market themselves like it's almost like a business that you run instead of a community resource that which it should be, like these churches could do more for communities than politicians ever could, and they don't. They keep all their money for themselves. They have fog machines and premium sound systems when they could probably should use that money to do what Jesus would have done with that money, which would be invest it back into the community. They would not constantly look down on specific minorities and less fortunate groups of people just because their way of life doesn't jive with what they think life should be like. Like there's just so many things. All right. And I get it. Nobody's perfect, but there are certain paths of life where you are a representative for a much larger, identity, a much bigger meaning, a much bigger symbol to the rest of the people, right? It's like police officers. Like, not all cops are bad. I'm not one of those ACAB people, but like, I also can recognize that there have been, especially, as it's been magnified a lot in the news over the last decade or so, just there are some bad cops out there. And those bad cops ruin the reputation and everything and the image of police as a whole. There are a lot of great police officers out there who it's their job, and it's their job to protect people. It's their job to write traffic tickets when you're being a dickhead. But because a couple of cops killed some black people because they probably didn't need to, it now ruins it for everybody. It's the same thing with Christianity. There have been some pastors and just generally some church people who are, maybe they're having a bad day or maybe they're genuinely evil people, but they've tarnished this image of Christianity for a lot of people. And, especially now with the rise of the internet, and you're able to actually do a lot of your own research and kind of see like, oh, this is actually how people on the other side of the world view this and how they interpret it. And this is actually a lot of historical context for why things in the Bible were written that maybe weren't included in church because it would have, I don't know, not meshed with the message that the preacher was trying to reach. Anyway, like there's so many different things to it, right? And so like I'm not anti-Christianity by any means. I am a little anti-religion, because religion is very much a means of control. And it's emotional manipulation, it's financial manipulation, where, you know, like the Catholic Church has billions in assets. You know, a lot of it's tied up in real estate, right? Because that's, you know, where their churches stand. But like they have all these assets, you know, and and especially early on in the early church, it was just a means of controlling the population. You know, if this church ruled, you had to follow these church's rules, or you would get executed because you were a heretic, right? It's a means of control. And it's a way to keep people down and keep certain people in power. And I don't love that, all right? That's what government's for. And if your government is by the people, for the people, it's not. Let the government handle those things and keep the order and control. The church should instead be a resource for the people. You know, natural disasters come through. The churches are one of the first places that open up as shelters and food banks or whatever the case is, right? Like not showing up or sending out messages like, oh yeah, you had too many gays in your neighborhood. That's why that tornado came through and destroyed your entire life. Like, no, that's not necessary. All right. Like that definitely shouldn't be like that's not what you lead with. All right. You know, maybe down the line, once you've like, you know, helped people back on their feet and they're like, I just don't understand why this happened. That might be because all them gays in your neighborhood. Oh, I never thought about it like that. They'll at least be a little more receptive. It's still terrible, but they'll at least be a little more receptive to it. So anyway, all of that is to say that, this week, we're talking about Jesus. If you are a very uptight religious person or very sensitive to religious topics, this episode might feel a little blasphemous for you. Here's the thing, though. All right, it's not coming from me. All right, it's coming from these, you know, other books of the Bible. They're called apocryphal books. A lot of the Gnostic religions, Gnostic Christianity, denominations still believe that these books are just as real as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or any of the other books in the Bible that you believe are like 100% real and accurate. And so I wanted to share these with you because there are people out here who believe these things are true. Just like any kind of alien story that I share, there's people who believe that those aliens really did show up, all right? Or those ghosts really did appear. And so I'm not being a blasphemous dick for the sake of being a blasphemous dick. All right. These are stories out there about Jesus that exist and people believe them. And so we're going to have a little fun because Kid Jesus, honestly, kind of hardcore. Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time. All right, so we know the story of Jesus according to Luke chapter 2. Mary, who was like 16, but allegedly a virgin, got pregnant, but it wasn't by Joseph. It just magically happened. Now they got to go back to Bethlehem because King Herod, he's got to do a census, all this kind of stuff, which, look, contextually, there are a lot of problems with that, but that's not what this episode's about. All right. But Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And so, you know, kind of starting there, right? And so there are two versions of Jesus's birth, obviously Luke chapter 2, but then there's also kind of a version in the Gospel of Matthew. And in the Gospel of Matthew, King Herod has issued this decree that all male children born in Bethlehem actually needed to be killed because Herod had found out that this king of the Jews had been born. I don't know why I say it like that every time. It's funny to me. But he had found out that this alleged new king of the Jews had been born in Bethlehem. So King Herod, he's the actual king of the Jews, as was decreed by the Greeks who ruled the area at the time. And so he issues this decree that any male child that had been born in Bethlehem needed to be executed so that Herod's position as the literal king of the Jews could be protected. Joseph and Mary, they hear about this and they leave just in time to travel with toddler Jesus to Egypt to wait things out. Now, after that part in the Gospel of Matthew, it fast forwards several years into Jesus's preteen years, where he's kind of in the temple debating the priests and the rabbis and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, that there was a period there from when they left for Egypt to when they're back, in Israel, and there's like a gap. What happened in those years? Well, that's where the infancy gospel of Matthew comes in. It's again, it's one of these apocryphal books that tries to bridge the gap. Is it real? Did someone make it up to just try to put more story to Jesus's life? Since we don't really get a lot from Jesus' childhood, who knows? But there's people out here who think this is 100% real. And so in the infancy gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, this is where they're on their flight to Egypt, fleeing to Egypt. And on the way there, the Christ family stops in a cave to rest. This cave, however, is occupied by a herd of fire-breathing dragons who were not happy at all about the unexpected company, even if it was the Messiah. All right. So guys, did you know fire-breathing dragons live in Egypt? As if the Middle East didn't have enough going on already. Apparently, fire-breathing dragons live in this cave. I think you kind of see why maybe these books are not necessarily in the regular Bible. Anyway, so the dragons, they're not happy about the Christ family showing up to their cave. And so Jesus, who at this point in the story, actively breastfeeding, he is locked in on that nip. He hops off of Mary and walks over to the herd or flock or gaggle of dragons. And Joseph and Mary, they're freaking out, probably because Jesus is not only taking his first steps as a baby, but he's walking towards these angry fire-breathing dragons. And these dragons, upon seeing toddler Jesus, changed their menacing outlook and calmly retreated deeper into the cave. So now it's baby Jesus, dragon tamer. And so, I don't know, man. It's pretty sweet. It's a pretty sweet story. Little toddler Jesus, just in the middle of sucking some teat, and then just hops down and goes and commands the dragons to go back into the cave. Anyway, our next story here. This comes from the infancy gospel of Thomas. And so kind of in the timeline here, after the Christs had returned from Egypt and they were back living in Nazareth, Jesus, who's now 5 years old, would just kind of spend his free time playing beside a small stream with some of the other children. While the other kids were splashing around in the water, Jesus was making small pools and using the clay that was around him to mold little sparrows. The problem that it was the Sabbath, and you're not supposed to work in any kind of way, whether it's creating something or, actual working or whatever the case is. And so apparently you can't create little clay sparrows on the Sabbath because that's considered work. And so Joseph, he sees Jesus out there playing with the clay and he's like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this on the Sabbath? This isn't lawful. You're breaking your own dad's rules. He's gonna kill you for this one day. Probably. I don't know. I'm Joseph. I'm just here for the ride. Jesus ignored Joseph because you're not my dad. And I get it. And so instead, he just clapped his hands together, and all of the little clay sparrows that he had made immediately came to life. And as the birds flew away, destroying any evidence that Jesus had done anything wrong, he's literally just finding loopholes in his own dad God's laws. Jesus just kind of turned to Joseph and smiled with that sort of like evilly mischievous smile that like where a kid knows he's gotten away with everything. And so, whatever, Joseph was like, oh God, he's not even my kid. And so as Joseph walks away, one of the kids who was still playing nearby decided that Jesus needed to get a little bit more involved with the playtime, a little more play, a lot less work. All right. So Jesus, come over here and play with us. We're doing stuff on the Sabbath that's not breaking your own dad's laws. And so Jesus, he was like, nah, dog, I want to keep playing with my clay sparrows. I am making birds, and that is what I want to do. Do not bother me. Well, this kid comes over and starts like thrashing at Jesus's little clay pools with a stick. And Jesus, he does not like this. Jesus looks up and he says, quote, "Oh, evil, ungodly, foolish one." You know how 5-year-olds talk. "What did those pools of water do to hurt you? Behold, now you shall wither like a tree, and you will not bear leaves, root, or fruit." And just like that, this kid like aged decades within a matter of seconds and died, just dropped dead in front. And so, later that day, Jesus was walking down the street when another little kid in the neighborhood accidentally ran into him. You know how kids are. They're clumsy. They don't pay attention. Well, Jesus was not fond of, quote, being dashed against his shoulder. And so he did the only logical thing there was to do. Jesus, like this kid, bumps his shoulder, and then he turns around and he says, "Thou shalt not finish thy course. Thou shalt not finish thy course." And the kid immediately just dropped dead. So now, like 5-year-old Jesus just killing little kids because little kids are dicks, and Jesus has no patience for it. It's great. Like, God, if these books had been in the Bible, I would be a preacher. I would just be like, yo, this is Jesus. This is our guy. Don't mess with him. All right. He will, the hand of God just pop, pop, pop. Anyway, our next story happens a couple of chapters later in the infancy gospel of Thomas. And so shortly after this kid, runs into Jesus' shoulder and he strikes him dead, the child's parents find out that Jesus has killed their kid, and they ran to Joseph to tell him to get him under control. "Your child can't live with us in this village," they told him, "unless you can teach him to stop killing our kids." Like, this is in this Bible book. It's crazy. So Joseph, he called Jesus in to have an awkward kind of stepdad come to himself, I guess, talk with his son. Joseph kind of just sits down. "Jesus, listen, buddy, we got to talk. Why do you do these things that make people hate us?" And Jesus, he's the Son of God. He's like literally God, right? And Jesus, he just like stares right into Joseph's soul. And he's just like, "I know that these words are not yours. Nevertheless, for your sake, I will hold my peace, but they will bear their punishment." Because, that's how 5-year-olds talk. Immediately, as soon as he said that, out in the village, the parents that had originally complained to Joseph just went blind. I love this kid. When Joseph found out, he grabbed Jesus by the ear and like rang him by the ear. And then just like, "Jesus, what are you doing?" And then Jesus looks up. He's like, "It suffices you to seek and not to find, and you have done unwisely. Do you not know that I am your son? Vex me not." "Vex me not," said Jesus to his stepdad. Like, this kid, oh man, the attitude, the entitlement. And I kind of get it, right? Like, son of God. What's stepdad gonna do? You're not my dad. Like, Joseph gave up after that because it's like Jesus just like, yeah, no, I'm gonna keep killing people who cross me, and I'm gonna take care of their parents too because they suck. They're terrible parents. If they were better parents, their kids would pay attention where they're going or mind their own business and not splash in my little clay pools where I was making sparrows. Dad, Joseph, you're not even my real dad. Ugh. Anyway, can't wait till my real dad comes back. Anyway, moving on a little bit later in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Basically, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, a wild read. Oh God, what a wild read. So at this point in kid Jesus's life, local school teacher Zacchaeus, I think this is a different Zacchaeus than the one that's like in Acts, but maybe not. But Zacchaeus had heard about everything that Jesus was doing and offered to take him off of Joseph's hands to, quote, learn letters. Zacchaeus even promised to put some discipline into Jesus so that he would salute his elders and honor them as if they were his own fathers and grandfathers and not like have this sense of entitlement because he's the son of God. But as Zacchaeus tried to teach Jesus the Greek alphabet, things started to get a little weird. Jesus kind of looks up at him and goes, "You don't know alpha according to its nature, so how can you teach others the beta? I don't even know what that means. You're a hypocrite. If you know it, teach it, and then we'll believe you concerning the beta." I don't even know what that means. Neither did Zacchaeus. He's totally confused at this point. He has no idea how to respond. He had never actually heard anyone, much less a small child, speak so vaguely yet so philosophically to him. And he was completely off guard, which then launched him into an intense existential crisis. He's got Jesus and the rest of his students in front of him. He just says, "Woe is me, wretch that I am confounded. I have brought shame to myself by bringing this kid here. Take him away, Joseph. I can't stand to look at him." I can't make my own words clear, and I sure can't figure out what on earth he's saying. This child wasn't born on this planet. Who gave birth to him? I don't know. He keeps going. "Woe is me. I tried to get a disciple, and instead I found a master. I think, friends, that being such an old man who has been completely schooled by a child, that I am ready to die. What will I say when people question if I have been overtaken by a child? I can't deny it. I'm ignorant. He wins. Joseph, please take him away. He is great, but I don't know if he's a god or an angel, but he's something." And by that time, the elders in the school or the temple or wherever they're at, they have come over to console Zacchaeus in the middle of like his clear mental breakdown. And meanwhile, Jesus, he just walks out laughing hysterically at what he has done to this poor old man. And then he's quoted in the book as saying, "Now let those bear fruit that were barren, and let them see that were blind in heart. I come from above, so that I may curse them and call them to the things that are above, even as he commanded who has sent me for your sakes." And after he makes this little speech, the two kids that he had killed came back to life, and the parents that he had struck blind were allowed to see again. And after that, like the rest of the people in Nazareth, like really kept their distance from Jesus. It's great. This next one comes from the first gospel of the infancy of Jesus Christ. So we're out of Thomas, or the infancy gospel of Thomas. And so this happens a few years after blinding the adults and killing the random children. And so, Jesus, he had struck so much fear into the people of Nazareth that even the other neighborhood boys had adopted him as their king and acted as his own personal bodyguards. They spread their clothes out for him to sit on so he wasn't sitting in dirt. They gave him a crown of flowers. Anyone who traveled through the city was accosted by these kids and forced to visit Jesus to receive a blessing from him before they continued on. One day, a group of men came into the city carrying a small dead boy who had been bitten by a venomous snake. Jesus' bodyguards saw the group and did their usual duty of walking up to them and asking them to go pay Jesus a visit so they could get blessed. When the group initially refused, the boys just dragged these people against their will to see Jesus anyway. So Jesus, he listened to this group's story, and afterwards he gathered his bodyguards and set off to go kill this snake. The boys' parents, who were grieving over the death of their son, asked to be excused so they could go keep crying. One of the boys looks over them. Did you not hear what the king said? He said, we're going to go kill the snake, so you should probably obey him and do whatever he says so that, you can see what cool thing is about to happen. Likely confused at this point how one child had so much authority in a small village, the parents and this group reluctantly led the boys back out to where the snake had been found. When they arrived, Jesus went over to the snake nest, I guess, and commanded the snake to come out. Go and suck, because he's probably like a preteen now. Go and suck all the poison you put into that boy, said Jesus to this snake. And that's exactly what the snake did. Snake comes out of its little hole, goes over to the kid and just reverse bites him, I guess, and sucks the venom out. And after the snake was done, Jesus thanked the snake and then cursed it, which caused the snake to explode. Oh, God, this is so great. He then walked over to the boy, who was apparently Simon, one of Jesus's later disciples, touched him, and brought him back to life. So that is, I guess that's Simon's origin story. We got 2 more stories here. So going on farther into adulthood, this story comes from The Questions of Mary, which was a book specifically belonging to the Borborites, which was a sect of Gnostic Christians. Just as kind of a refresher real quick, Gnosticism refers to this belief held by some early Christians that the material world was created by a lower God, and that kind of this, quote, divine spark was trapped within the human body, sort of like Thetans with Scientology, but with Jesus. And so the only way to liberate this divine spark was through gnosis, which is this special sort of spiritual knowledge that could only be acquired through a direct encounter with a divine being. Now, you probably might be wondering what these sorts of encounters look like. Well, this book, The Questions of Mary, attempts to kind of show you and tell you what it's all about. Unfortunately, the original text itself has been lost, but early Christian writer Epiphanius was happy to write all about it as a way to criticize the Borborites for being some of the worst people on the planet. And the Borborites, I don't think were literally terrible, but they were a different Christian group who had a different set of beliefs. And so they're, they're different, gross, whatever. So in this book, The Questions of Mary, Jesus took Mary Magdalene, she's the Mary with all the questions. He took her to the top of a mountain, pulled a full-sized, grown, functional woman out of his own side, out of his own rib cage. It's like he's recreating Genesis, where Eve was made from Adam's rib. He just reaches into his own rib cage and just pulls out this babe, and then he starts having extremely graphic sex with her. I mean, however it was described in the book. I mean, just doing all the things, which if he pulled her out of his side, it's kind of, he's just masturbating, kind of, right? He pulled the woman out of his own body. So he's just banging himself, kind of. He's just banging a female version of himself, which, okay, whatever. And so Mary Magdalene, she is watching in horror because she's probably got it for Jesus. She wants to be doing that. She wishes she was that woman right now, getting railed by Jesus, just straight up manhandled by Jesus. All right. But she's watching Jesus basically do it with himself. And especially then at the very end, as Jesus finished up both he and his rib lady, quote, began partaking of his emission. Gross. He's banging himself, just Jesus jizz everywhere. And then him and his rib lady just start lapping it up. I don't know where, off her back or something, off her boobs. I don't know, but it's just disgusting. Mary Magdalene, she sees this happening. She falls over completely traumatized by what she has just witnessed. And then Jesus turned to her and he's like, "Oh, ye of little faith, why do you doubt?" And like, among the many questions you likely have right now, as did Mary, one being simply, why? Well, according to the Borborites, this is their translation of earlier Old and New Testament passages regarding communion and how to view Christ. So like, for example, when Jesus told the disciples to, quote, eat my flesh and drink my blood in John chapter 6, he certainly was not metaphorically referring to the bread and grape juice. He definitely meant, his own jizz. So the Borborites, like, they were pretty sex crazed, all right? But and look, that's not just one example. There's another one. In the Old Testament, when David in Psalm number 1 said that a man is like a tree planted by the water that will bring forth his fruit was his jizz, basically. And when the verse continues by saying its leaf shall not fall off, the Borborites interpreted that as saying the semen should not fall to the ground, but should instead be consumed. And so, and if that wasn't enough, right? The Borborites also referred to another Old Testament passage in Joshua 2, when Rahab tied a scarlet thread to her window, which every logical theologian believed was simply a symbol to keep a promise. The Borborites, however, did like crazy mental gymnastics to the notion that the scarlet thread was actually Rahab's menstrual blood, and that the Proverbs 5 command to drink water from your cisterns meant that you should be drinking that stuff, because that's how communion should go. Jizz and period blood. That is the blood and body of Christ. Oh, God, it's disgusting. Of course, none of that makes sense, and I totally understand why Epiphanius was openly mocking these people, because these people are weird. All right, they're not terrible. They're just weird. All right, it's disgusting. So we'll get as far away from that as we possibly can. We'll go now to the end of Jesus's life in the book, The Resurrection of Jesus by Bartholomew. And following Jesus's crucifixion, which surely you know quite well that story, Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus's body down from the cross and placed it in a tomb. The next day, Death ascended from hell with his 6 sons, which, how do you have offspring in hell? No one has really explained that. They entered the tomb and showed them Jesus lying there with napkins covering his face. And Death, he's looking over Jesus' body and he says, "Who are you?" And at that moment, Jesus slowly removed the napkins from his face. Zombie Jesus turns to Death and begins laughing at him, which is just an incomprehensible level of creepiness, right? Like, imagine a dead person, right? Because Jesus, he's lost a ton of blood. Like, he's really just skin and bones now, laying in the tomb, and Death is in there. And Death is like, "Who are you?" And then Jesus just slowly removes the napkin, the cloth or whatever that was over his face. And he just like, whatever. Like, oh, I'm having too much fun with this. Everyone, like Death and his little demons, they run away, as you should in that instance. But then they came back a short time later, and again, Death asked Jesus who he was, and again, Jesus just laughs in his face. The group from hell then waits for Jesus to stop laughing, probably wholly confused as to what's going on. But eventually Jesus calmed down, and with a straight face, mounted a chariot of cherubim and just rode into hell. How do you fit an entire chariot full of cherubim, which I'm still confused as to what cherubim actually are. Like, they're either little angel babies or they're like these massive, like, Thunderbird muscular giant like man eagles with lion paws. It's like a half man, half lion, half eagle sort of thing. I don't know. Either way, you got to stuff. If that's the case, those things are huge. And so you got a chariot with a fleet of those things inside the tomb. How does that even work? Like, how big was that tomb? It couldn't have been that big. Like, you need a full-blown cave, like a giant cave, not just like a little cave, but like, I'm talking like mammoth caved size cave. And as far as I know, not a cave that big over there. And so he just mounts this chariot of cherubim and rides into hell. He destroys all the doors. He ties up 2 different demons. He sets everyone in hell free, including Adam, who was apparently there for some reason. I don't know. And then as everyone is like making their way out, Jesus turns to Judas, who had already killed himself at this point, and just like berates him for all of the, I can't believe you sold me for silver, dog. What are you even thinking? Don't you know who I am? And then he pointed out 30 different sins that Judas had committed, which I can't believe was only 30. And when he finished, 30 snakes appeared and began eating Judas alive, which is hardcore because I don't know how, snakes just like swallow things whole. So how can 30 snakes all swallow the same dude whole? I don't know. Anyway, before death's like minions or sons could arrive back in hell, Jesus had taken everyone with him except for Judas, Cain, and Herod the Great. Of course, right? Judas, obviously, for betraying him, Cain for committing the first murder, and then Herod the Great for thinking that he was the real king of the Jews. The next morning, Mary Magdalene, Jesus' mother Mary, Salome, and another Mary, because the number of female names back then was apparently very limited, and 4 other unnamed women all went to Jesus' tomb. When they arrived, they met a guy named Philogenies, whose son had been healed by Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration. One of the Marys said, "If you have taken him away, tell me where you laid him, and I will take him away." And Philogenies, he was like, "Don't worry, the good Jews," I don't know why they say it like that. The good Jews wanted a safe tomb for Jesus so the bad Jews wouldn't steal his body. I came out here at midnight and saw all the orders of angels, cherubim, seraphim, powers, and virgins. Peter was here too, and if it hadn't been for him, I probably would have died. And then I don't know what the point of any of that was, but he said it. And then suddenly, Jesus appeared and interrupted the group. And after a long conversation with his mother, Jesus blessed her body and ascended to heaven, where God presented him with a crown. Adam and Eve, who notably were 120 feet and 75 feet tall, respectively, were ushered into heaven by the archangel Michael. Adam was forgiven and tasked with standing at the gate of life to greet everyone as they entered into heaven. So it's not St. Peter with the guest list. It's Adam. It's 120 foot tall Adam who is greeting people at the gates. Eve, on the other hand, was placed over all of the women who, quote, had done the will of God, and greet them as they entered. And that is the real story of Jesus Christ.
All done.
There you go. The life of kid Jesus, mostly kid Jesus, but a little bit of adult Jesus as well in the books. These stories are in the 100 Stories Christianity edition that I put together. A lot of that just takes lesser known stories from the Bible that are just like crazy weird. And then also some stories from the early church and early saints, along with these, stories from the apocryphal books of various Bibles. But, just a lot of like, when you really dig into the Abrahamic religion, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all that kind of stuff, like it's wild. There's a lot of crazy stuff that we just conveniently gloss over because we don't want to acknowledge that some of this is really weird and a little messed up. Okay. Oh God. Anyway, I don't even I can't even begin to try to figure out what we learned today because it's all nonsense. It's just if you go to church on Sunday and you're listening to the story of how Jesus rose again for our sins, I hope you just have a little flashback in your mind of little kid Jesus just striking other little kids down because they ran into him, or giving Zacchaeus a mental breakdown for trying to teach him the Greek alphabet. Like, oh man, good times. Anyway, next week on the show, we are looking at some weird ways to die. I got 3 stories of Gloria Ramirez, Egidius Schiffer, I don't know, he's German, I think, and Greg Flanagan. Just crazy ways that people died, some on purpose, some by complete random chance. So tune in next week for that. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Hope you didn't get super offended that I kind of made a mockery of Christianity in a roundabout way. I didn't. These apocryphal books did. Don't blame me. Blame these books. That's my stance. Don't hate me, please. Anyway, see ya.
This is a podcast